So we're team number 7, visualizing Durham Public Schools, and this is our poster. And our work in this project continues upon the work done by an interinstitutional BAS connections team between Duke and NCCU, which focused on understanding the community schools model, which is a way of looking at schools as the center of a community, focusing on community assets such as parks, grocery stores, libraries around schools, and thinking about how schools can be a major part of communities themselves. So using that idea, our work specifically was looking at how to make sure that people from Duke, NCCU, and other universities can equitably enter into the public school system, knowing more about the schools and the school communities. So in order to do this, we created an R Shiny app in order to provide a comprehensive resource about the Durham Public Schools, showing both community assets, as I explained, such as libraries, grocery stores, parks, using leaflet maps that are interactive, as well as school statistical data in the form of graphs showing things like enrollment numbers, in-school suspension rates, and free and reduced lunch numbers. And the most important part about our project, I think, is to consolidate disparate information from multiple sources into one easy to use dashboard, as well as to frame the conversation around public schools in a more positive light, focusing on assets rather than deficits. And what I'm also going to do now is share the link to this interactive dashboard that we created in the chat.
I shared it already, so.
Oh, perfect.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction, Ria. So I'm going to start off. I'll talk you through a little bit of our methods, which you can find on the top of our poster. So to begin with our project, we had to collect data from several different sources, like Ria said. A lot of information that we found about Durham Public Schools was located in disparate places that weren't connected and didn't necessarily talk to each other really. So we collected data from sources like Durham Open Data. We collected a lot of longitudinal and latitudinal data from just like Google Maps and things like that. We also used NC Report Card to find a lot of data for our school statistics. So that first step of data collection took about 2 weeks, and that was us really just trying to find a lot of information about the resources that were located around the schools, and that included spatial data and then also a lot of information about the schools themselves. So like Ria touched upon inside, certain statistics like graduation rates, free and reduced lunch, and etc. The next step was to visualize our spatial data and also to visualize our school stats. The way our team took the approach was to sort of break off at this point into 2 different branches. So 2 of us were working on displaying the spatial data, understanding how to create a map using the leaflet package, and also to display our markers in a way that was visually appealing and also user-friendly. And then the other 2 of us worked on visualizing the school statistics through using ggplot, so creating graphs and figuring out the best ways to display those school statistics. After those 2 steps, we focused on creating the homepage, which you guys can see if you follow the link. And the main idea of that was to just create an eye-catching introductory page that would offer information and sort of a summary about our project, and be appealing to the user and sort of give some background information on both the BAS connections research that we followed up on our project, and then also on us as a team. And then the last step was deploying the app, which Ria did for us, which was amazing. But yeah, through that we learned how to use a Shiny server so that our app was able to be used for public use, and hopefully for students and teachers and volunteers entering the schools. So I'll also talk about a little bit about the spatial data. We can go a little bit more into depth of that as well. An entire page of our project is for our spatial data. And digging into that, as you can see, if you're walking through the app now, for each school, there is a highlighted zone, which will show you that zone on the map. And in order to display that, we found GeoJSON files, which we obtained from Durham Open Data. And with that, we were able to display the shapes of the school zones and place those on the interactive map. Then with our latitudinal and longitudinal data that we obtained from the various sources, we were able to display those as markers on the map. And so for specific variables, each one has a different icon, but we also have an option for icon clustering, which you'll see in areas where there are a lot of markers. You'll see a circle with a number that sort of summarizes the amount of markers that are there until you zoom in, and then they spread out a little bit. So we added that feature for some of our variables that have a lot of points so that it's a little bit more visually accessible and able to see. But the main idea that we wanted to do with this map was to display our data points in relation to the schools so that you could see where those resources are located in and around the school zone.
Can everybody hear me? All right, cool. So me and Rhea really focused on the school statistics part when we were putting it together in the app. And what that includes is 22 data specific variables that we collected from NC school report cards, DPS, databases, NCDPI dashboards, and everything else that kind of encompasses what we were trying to go for about different variables in different schools, in the 10 different schools that we that are in our data set. So when we decided to display the data, we decided to use a form called ggplot, which kind of just puts everything into bar plots and organizes them based on going from ascending order. And in this picture, you can see that the line that's going down, that's the Durham County average. So we kind of did that for everyone. There were some variables that we weren't able to get to, but just because it was hard to display, but the ones that we did choose, they say a lot about these schools. And they also go with a piece of context, just like the spatial data. And I can talk. I'm sorry, guys.
No worries. We're all muddling through in this pandemic. Just keep going. The background noise isn't too bad.
Okay, sorry, I'm in the airport. So I can go into the context and resources. So in each, for the spatial data and the school statistics, we did have context and resources, which kind of gives a little bit more insight about the variables for spatial data and for school stats. So when you click on the different variable, it also pops up with context, which includes a little bit more insight about social economic, what's the word? Context, excuse me, social context or cultural context, something that gives a little bit more information about the statistics without just having just data or points that don't really say much about the community as a whole, because we said that is the main goal of our project. And most of the context, they also include links as well that can go more in depth about the specific variable, which can include different other databases or dashboards and some articles, some infographics, just overall some more information about the specific variable, as well as in this specific example, there is definitions as well that may include some jargon that might not be familiar to some stakeholders or the community. So we wanted to include that as well. So everything is very accessible. And yeah.
Yeah, so the adding the context was specifically important, as Patience just touched on making it accessible for everybody. So while our primary stakeholders are potentially the Bass Connections team and people who are well versed in the school lingo, it's important that we also make sure that it's accessible to all those in the Durham community that it can be used for. So people that are familiar with Durham or familiar with Durham County, and making sure that they also are aware of the resources that are available to them. And like Patience said, on the picture found on the poster, it's a screenshot from the in-school statistics or in-school suspension statistics page. And in the context paragraph, we define the school to prison pipeline, which is a term that many people may not know if they're not familiar with the community. And the top link takes the viewer to research on racial bias in school discipline. And the bottom link is an article that outlines juvenile incarceration situation in the United States. So this issue is one that's it's interesting to discuss, and many people may not be aware of it. So providing the context is crucial in making sure that people are fully aware of the importance of like this variable and the issue that's at hand. And so, yeah, so overall, we just hope that we can inform all those who visit the site on the importance of every variable that is included. And for the future of the dashboard, we really hope that so our next step is, kind of putting this in the hands of the Bass Connections team, which Ali and I are both on. So we're going to continue it, and hopefully that the Bass Connections team can, which has been a stakeholder of ours, can continue to add on to it with more variables. And also our data or our code should be accessible so that everybody who wants to add more variables and are able to. We also, hope to increase interrelations with Duke students, NCCU students, and the Durham community, because we want everybody to have to be able to use this and know how to. And in the future, we hope to also expand it to all Durham public schools rather than the 10 that we're focusing on that Duke and NC Central most frequently partner with. And eventually, I mean, ideally, it could be a state or a nationwide tool, which would be fantastic. And then we hope to influence a reformed curriculum to all Duke and NCCU students regarding new approaches for Durham public schools. So making sure that students go in fully prepared and have a deep understanding of the background that of the school that they're going into, so they don't go in blind and aren't quite sure what to do.
Before we conclude, I want to talk briefly about how we ended up deploying our Shiny app. As Ali mentioned earlier, we used Shiny Server, which is a public website, and it is free to use for their most basic plan, which is the plan we're on currently. So it connects directly to the R Shiny app and allows you to publish straight from your RStudio application, which is very useful and made it very user-friendly. And we have a link available for anyone to use, and that is public for anyone. And the limitations with the free version of Shiny Server that we are using is the amount of time people can spend on the app every month. I believe it's 25 hours a month. And we're going to reevaluate how much traffic we get on the app and how much time is needed for the future, and can work on expanding that plan in order to make sure that this website is accessible for everyone. So now, if you have any questions about our poster, please feel free to ask. Also, visit the link and see our dashboard, poke around and ask any questions about that. And you can also access the dashboard using the QR code on the bottom of the poster as well.
Thank you all. This is some really amazing, diligent work, and very nicely presented. I'm glad everyone got a chance to really show off their amazing stuff. Folks, go ahead and put questions in the chat or unmute yourself, whatever works for you.
I'll go first if no one else. I had a couple questions. One, I was just curious to hear a little bit more about any work you may have done connecting with potential users to kind of direct what you ended up creating as a deliverable, if you talk to parents or children or students. And another thing, I was curious, the mapping is beautiful, and I think as are the statistics. When you're collecting information or the data for the mapping, I was curious if you found anything that could help define like the walkability of, or like helping inform people on how they could actually get to some of these different locations. Because I'd imagine with children and students, like that would be really important information to know of. How do you get there? Is it safe? Is it and obviously there's a lot of context that's baked into that kind of statistics as well, but it may be really interesting to look up. Another thing, I just would really love to learn more about the Bass Connections program. I'm with Eamon here and the team Team 8 that's doing the Farm to Fork. We do food distribution, and this kind of geographical information is really interesting and connecting with the students at these different schools would be really cool. So I just implore you, if you guys are interested in not doing anything at 1:30, to come see Team 8. But thank you. Excellent work, guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the comments. As for your first question, I think the main stakeholder that we focus on communicating with directly was the Bass Connections team, which is made up of people who are experts in the community school model and the public school system. So rather than focusing directly with parents and children, I think that our app is open to anyone and we'd be happy for everyone to use it. But I think right now in the early stages, it was more focused on university students who are entering the school system as things like pre-service teachers or volunteers in the schools to make sure that they have a larger context about the communities that they're entering into. And so we focused more on getting feedback from the Bass Connections team about what they hope to see on the dashboard in order to make sure that it had most of the information that would be helpful to learn about the communities and what's available in those communities specifically. And briefly as to your second question about the walkability or the safety of getting to locations, we don't have anything specifically on exact distance written on those maps, but we do have a metric of sidewalk coverage, which could be helpful to see how much of an area is covered in sidewalk or how safe it would be to get to certain areas. And if anyone else has anything to add on either of those two.
Yeah, I can say something. So I think one main part of why we decided to do this project was definitely to raise some awareness about those things and to make it like Ray was saying about the sidewalk coverage. So then the community and the public is informed that some of these places may not be walkable and that there should be some things put in place so then students, families, or whoever it may be can access these different variables that is presented in the spatial data.
We also do mention bus stops, so for public buses, so that's also a way that people are able to get around. I would say, I feel like most people would prefer to probably walk if it's, or from things to be in walking distance, but bus stops are also a potential option because the Durham public transit system tends to be pretty strong with bus stops kind of scattered all over, especially if you're kind of in the city center and downtown area. And I'll also attach a link to the Bass Connections team in the chat if you're more interested.
Hey, I think it's a great project. I really like the website. And I have two questions. You may have already answered them. If so, I apologize. But curious how you chose to limit to these schools, the data for just these schools in Durham. And maybe it's just an issue of scope and having to limit the project. And maybe that's also something the Bass Connections team is going to pick up. And the second part is, what folks at DPS have said, if they're excited about this, and as I imagine they are.
I can answer this question. So these, as Drew said, these are the 10 schools that NCCU and Duke most partner with. NCCU has a couple of schools that we call our Eagle schools, and those are schools we kind of, go into, take care of. The teacher prep students and the social work students go into those schools most often. We do a lot of community service in those different in those different schools. So that's kind of how Bass Connections chose these schools. And additionally, I can say that my mom works for DPS, and I kind of showed her the dashboard, and she was really excited to look at it. So and also the people that we partner with Bass Connections who work with DPS, they were really excited to see it as well.
Last week, I think Nico here and one of the members of the Bass Connections team also went into a elementary school. I'm not quite sure which one, but they went and presented it, and apparently we got pretty good feedback. So that was really good. So yeah, I presented to like administration in elementary school. So we have gotten pretty good feedback from DPS people so far. Of course, we hope to expand it more in the future so that more people will see it and get more feedback so we can update things as we see fit. But as of now, we've gotten pretty good feedback from people in Durham public schools.
Yeah, you all definitely had Mr. Case on your last presentation, who was until recently a school board member in Durham. So definitely a lot of visibility. It's very cool.
Yeah, and he's been very important. He's given us a lot of feedback, but it's because he's on the Bass Connections team now.
Yeah.
So he comes in every week, or pretty much every week we see him, and he gives us feedback on what we've been working on. So he's been super helpful in making sure that this dashboard is where it should be.
And there's even been, sorry, I'm gonna jump in. I was a project manager for this. I didn't do any work, but they were very wonderful people to do that did all of this. But there have also been talks about this app actually living within the DPS framework. So DPS actually like maintaining it and like being the ones that sort of like maintain it. So yeah, there is excitement, and there is a possibility. There is excitement in the DPS sort of like ecosystem for a tool like this.
I'll just say the mark of a great Data Plus project manager is to be able to say, I didn't do any work, and yet somehow really, really good work happened. So I'll leave it at that. Great stuff. Other questions folks have? We've got about 7 minutes left, and if folks want to hop out to other breakout rooms for 11, in your own time, but we've got time for a couple questions here.
We would also love any feedback on the app, if you guys have taken a look, or any comments on that as well.
So I guess I have an out there question, which comes from the walkability thing that Esco raised. You've got, DPS buses, which are of limited quantity, and they sort of have to stagger them. The middle school kids get picked up at 6 and so on. You've got all this stuff mapped out. I've heard people saying, wouldn't it be amazing if they were able to beef up the transit system so that high school kids could take public buses and then use the DPS buses for elementary and middle, things like that. But then obviously they'd have to beef up the transit system. How can you walk through, like, if someone wanted to make that kind of study, like how much do you have here for sort of, here are the high schools, here are schools, here are buses, here's where the neighborhoods are, begin to map out how hard it would be to sort of build out more bus stops to really serve students?
I think we have a good starting framework in place, I would say, where we have the location of the school as well as the school zone. So where students going to that school would be living, where they would be coming from, because that's an important point to see if there's bus stops in between that area where students would actually be traveling from. And we also have the location of all those public bus stops in Durham County. So I think that it would be a good way to start saying how many bus stops are in this school zone, and is that enough to help high school students get from their homes to the school, and also see how many are inside that school zone and where exactly they're located. I think a little more work would have to be done to see how many buses go through each stop, or what are the timings and how often do they run. But I think it would be a good starting point to see the location of those bus stops, to see if it's even an accessible plan with the framework that's in place right now.
Awesome, thank you. That question comes from my personal experience, as I have a rising ninth grader who's actually at the DPS school at NCCU, and we're trying to figure out exactly the DPS bus or the public bus. So it's very cool. Any other questions?
I just want to add that we did like try to we at one point we thought about like visualizing bus routes, but getting data on the schedule because of schedule changes for COVID was a bit interesting.
Yep.
So that could be a next step. But I know RIA tried to collect some, so that's the only reason I was mentioning that.
That's interesting.
With the bus routes as well, it got a little, or it would have gotten very confusing on the map, seeing all those lines crossing over, and I think it would have been a little chaotic.
It's also, I mean, one of the more interesting just kind of spatial geometry questions is just how much time does it actually take people to move through a city, right? Like you have like the Google Maps directions for a car, but just how do you walk on bad sidewalks? How do you get there? And so that's really cool stuff, and I'm glad you set it up to really ask those questions. Anyone have a last question?